Well, hello there, welcome! Today, there's something very special to show off. Now, if you're out of the loop, earlier in the year, the developers did confirm the existence and development of an as-yet unnamed third expansion for Guild Wars 2, which is obviously really exciting. They never really had much to show for it at the time, just a bit of concept art, this animated carousel here, which really seemed to suggest we would not only be getting an expansion, but we'd be going back to Cantha as well, one of the big locations from the original game. That's been pretty much it. The rest of our focus has been on the current stories of Aurene and Jormag and the Char in the Icebrood saga. That is until today, when for the current anniversary for Guild Wars 2, they've done a ton of stuff, including sharing a full-fledged teaser for the X-Pack and revealing its name, The End of Dragons. So there's a ton to get through here, including what the trailer itself shows, but also what this might mean for when the X-Pack itself releases. So I'm going to go into those details today. We'll even break down what we see. But first, why don't I just show you guys what ArenaNet have given us? It's got an interesting, different art style to any of the other trailers we've seen before. Beautiful music, and while I thought it would probably be fairly insubstantive, it is just a teaser. It even sets up some really interesting twists and enigma for the story. So let's jump in.
This land, it's a monument to mortal resilience. They built new lives upon the very thing that sought to end theirs.
Portals are little flames, brilliant, hot, then gone. Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavine, it does. They need me.
Alright, there you have it. Oh, there's so many good subjects here. Especially the music, man. That, like, Canthan twist on kind of the Guild Wars musical motif. So good. Visually, it reminds me a little bit of the teaser we got for Heart of Thorns. Path of Fire never had such a teaser, but they had kind of a more different art style going on, and well, it looks like they're playing a little bit with it here on this one. Extremely colorful. We're basically getting a montage traveling through what are distinctly, clearly Canthan locations. The music in the background sounds kind of Canthan. Everything's coming together. Really, it's beyond confirmed at this point, I would say, that we are going back to that region of the world with this X-Pack. So let's talk a little bit about why they might have done a teaser here and now. How far away is this thing? Well, it's not this year, and the devs themselves did confirm it. Usually when they do a trailer or something like this, they'll have a post on the official website. They do say there that it's a 2021 release. My best bet, my best guess, is it's going to be either early or mid 2021. I wouldn't mind if it's basically exactly a year from now and they really get to build it up and make sure it's a really decent product, but they haven't said anything further than that it's just 2021. I think the idea of having a teaser is just because, you know, the anniversary of the game is a big moment. They want to make sure people continue to be enticed and excited, so they're making sure that this remains in our thoughts. Talking a little bit more about the title, I do really like it. They followed the scheme, I guess, that we're now on, that the other expansions did. You know, we had the Heart of Thorns, we had the Path of Fire, and now by going with the End of Dragons, it really feels like they're sticking to their guns. I remember that with the other two expansions, the devs had told stories how they left it to open poll amongst the company. Lots of people could vote on what they preferred the title would be, and it wasn't that they were specifically only going with Path of Fire, Heart of Thorns, End of Dragons. But I guess at this point, if they did host another vote, it would be because a lot of people just kind of like that pattern now. The idea of End of Dragons, though, is really, really substantial. If you follow the story to even quite a shallow level, you will know that the dragons are basically integral to Tyria's survival, that if you try to just kill them and not replace them, you're going to really mess magic up, as we've seen through a lot of the recent plots. The main idea being that we want to find replacements, we want more friendly dragons, dragons on our side like Aurene, empathetic dragons, and now we hear End of Dragons, and we get all this crazy dialogue as we go ahead into this teaser, which really seems to turn a lot of that stuff on its head. I know that a lot of people have been excited and thinking about the idea of a Guild Wars 3, and well, an expansion called The End of Dragons I feel like would be a hell of a way to segue into something like that, but maybe these are discussions for some time next year when we're a bit closer. I'm just really curious what they mean for the story here, particularly on the side of dragons, because if we go to the end of the trailer, as you'll see, we get the new logo. Really gorgeous. I love the way that they've done their logos ever since launch. The Heart of Thorns one was great. The Path of Fire one was immaculate. Now we get the new one. Beautiful blue hue to the color scheme, leading a lot of people to think that this is going to be very underwater leaning. I'll talk about that in a second. But you'll notice very carefully here that we have the one dragon, like a Hydra tidal wave coming over the top. Very reminiscent of the dragon we saw in the launch logo, I'd say, and even a little bit the Heart of Thorns one. And then underneath is another dragon. And in fact, this trailer has dialogue between two dragons talking to one another, which is really where things get quite fascinating. So this X-Pack will be focusing on two dragons at once. Now, I might have guessed that without even watching the teaser. If you told me that this was going to be called End of Dragons, right now we're dealing with Jormag. Let's assume that the Icebrood saga ends and Jormag is out of the picture. Well, that would leave two dragons. You've got the Deep Sea Dragon and you have Primordus. So sure, the logo might have two dragons on it. It's the End of Dragons. We'd have to deal with both at once. The idea of one X-Pack, two dragons has always excited me. You know, being able to see two of them fight or whatnot. But neither of these seem to be Primordus, and Primordus doesn't seem to feature at all in this trailer. It's a conversation between two characters, presumably both of them dragons. I don't get the sense that Primordus has much to do with this at all. It's these things, who we're going to talk a lot about here. The idea of the dragon, like, lurching out of the tidal wave. You guys have watched my channel for a long time, know that I love referencing this, but I really want to see it get paid off. Years ago, before Heart of Thorns came out, there was a drop of concept art from the studio of Lion's Arch being attacked by a giant tidal wave and like this Hydra, these underwater draconic looking creatures lurching out of the water as it did so. And I'm just saying guys, maybe that can happen this next expansion finally. Remember how Path of Fire started with us catching up with Ellen Keel briefly in Lion's Arch? Well, what if the next expansion starts with us catching up at Lion's Arch? Lion's Arch is a great place to maybe stage ships and actually sail down to Cantha from. I know that we do now have the Amnoon Oasis, and even perhaps Istan really would be a great location. Further south, friendly territories with great docks and so on. But if it started at Lion's Arch, maybe we could finally have this thing where we're getting attacked by all this water, and that's the thing that kickstarts it. There's honestly so many cool ways in which the plot could begin for this X-Pack, but looking at the logo, it just reminds me of that old concept art, and I can't help but focus on it. But I just really enjoy the aesthetic. I find the whole twin dragon thing, the whole yin-yang thing, I guess, that they're leaning into a little bit there, very, very, very curious. And with a title like this, I really do feel like big things could be happening for the plot and the progression of this whole franchise in this one X-Pack. Well, let's go back now and take the trailer nice and slow, and I want to give you guys a little breakdown of each shot and each line of dialogue we get as it goes along, because I think it will be really illuminating to you guys, especially that didn't play Guild Wars 1 factions, because it really does seem very directly to look at some factions locations here, even if it's just for the nostalgia, something that some of you guys might not be able to enjoy. So we're going through the clouds, it's very pink. I'm not sure what they're trying to say about the time of day, the tone of it, or whatever at this time, but we're enjoying ourselves. We go through, we start to see immediately, it feels a bit Cantha-esque, I would say, with these very tall, spiked mountains here. I kind of felt like, as I was watching this with all the crazy colors, that Aurene was a big part of this trailer. Because, you know, Aurene is kind of like the prismatic dragon, lots of magics at once, and that kind of feels very her area. I thought that this was a conversation between Aurene and Kunavang. Kunavang, you guys just saw, is mentioned. We'll get to that in a second. But this tweet here from Quan Peng, who posted right after the trailer dropped, said, "So many emotions as this is finally revealed. I'm the narrative lead on End of Dragons, and that was the first peek at Kunavang and a mysterious new character." So basically what I think it is the two dragons we see in the logo. One of them could be Kunavang, who we know is a great dragon but not an elder dragon. And the other one is this mysterious new character. So Aurene isn't featuring. All this dialogue we're hearing is Kunavang speaking and this mysterious new character speaking. So what happens to Aurene? Why is she not involved in this plot? I would have really expected to see her in the teaser, but hey. Moving on, visually, we'll get to that stuff again in a second. This is pretty cool. Now, what I'm looking at when I see this is the Shinji Arena. Or, in particular, the Shinji Training Arena. If you guys played Factions, one of the things you were very likely to miss back in the day and even now is in the early stages of that campaign for Guild Wars 1, there are some side quests you can do that teach you more about the game's mechanics and give you a better grip on the handling of your chosen profession. They even unlock some skills for you. You're basically earning, if I remember it rightly, your insignia. They're like advanced quests that you can do at the monastery before moving on in the early moments of that game's campaign. The thing is, those side quests are really easy to miss. But if you accept them, they take you into like a tiny little circular arena where you get to, you know, do these little duels and things. And that is what this feels like. This doesn't just feel like Cantha to me. This feels very much like Shinji, the tutorial starter area from the original game. I'm sure that they're just drawing on it like visually for inspiration, but it really made me smile immediately to see this, even with the waterfall on the side. And, you know, this weird, cloudy, murky fog stuff. That reminds me a lot of the toxic miasma and, you know, the affliction, which I'm sure is not going to be part of Guild Wars 2's story. For those out of the loop, when we were in Cantha in the first game, there was this whole story with a plague, basically. But that's well and truly done. I don't think Guild Wars 2 needs to really touch on that much. And this mist is just to look pretty, for a nice effect, I suppose. But look at this, guys! I can't believe I'm looking at these kinds of gateways and things again, even though it's so many years later. And 250 years forward in the setting as well could have led to a lot of architectural change, but hasn't. I think that's fine. I think leaning into the past imagery is the right way to go for ArenaNet right now. They really want to capture a lot of those old players. And I mean, it looked good 10 years ago. It looks good now. You don't have to change it up that much just because 250 years has changed in game, in universe, and we saw that 250 years meant a lot of difference for mainland Tyria. It doesn't necessarily have to for Cantha. And in fact, that's one of the big things I enjoyed about this trailer, I'll say, is that how little Cantha has changed. Because for the lore that they had written ages ago, when Guild Wars 2 first came out, there was an article called The Movement of the World that described what had happened over 250 years here. You know, there's been political upheaval, there's been potentially a lot of geographic upheaval just because of the movement of the Elder Dragons that could have led to the devs having a very different take. But what we see in this trailer is the city looking very similar, we see Shinji looking very similar, we see the Jade Sea looking very similar, and I wouldn't necessarily consider that too much of a retcon, but it was obviously a stylistic choice that they had to make, and I think they went the right way now that I'm actually experiencing this teaser here. Let's talk a little bit about the dialogue. It is a mod, which, by the way, they baked into the teaser this time, so for my little analysis is nice. So this is coming from Kunavang. Kunavang seems to be in a discussion and is defending the virtue of mortals. So just a quick reminder for those that don't know, Kunavang is a character that is very analogous to Glint. So where Tyria had this big interesting dragon as a part of its main story right at the beginning called Glint, we kind of had a similar character, draconic character, down in Cantha called Kunavang, a different species of dragon, and neither of these two dragons are elder dragons, but nonetheless big, prominent characters that play big roles in their respective campaigns. When Guild Wars 2 was coming out, ArenaNet said in an article that the dragons Glint and Kunavang were as different from the Elder Dragons as night was from day. And that seemed fine until many years later, where it turned out actually Glint was really, really related to the Elder Dragons and had this close connection with Kralkatorrik and so on. Well, the whole Kralkatorrik arc is over now, and that leads us to the question, well, hold on, if Glint ended up being deeply connected to the Elder Dragons, maybe Kunavang is too. Kunavang not being Elder, but being, you know, somehow integral to this whole story. And really, really, the main excitement about returning to this territory is that Kunavang's there. You know, this is the Dragon Empire, and it has many species of salt spray moving around, and we have Kunavang, and seeing how they tie into this broader story that the devs have now been going on about for the past 8 years of the Elder Dragons is big. So fast forward to this teaser, and who do we get speaking? Kunavang! Absolutely the right play for ArenaNet to make. That Kunavang is going to feature prominently in this X-Pack is totally the right way to go. I noticed online a few of you had remarked on the new voice acting for Kunavang. She used to sound very different. It's kind of like how Glint changed a bit, I guess, as well, even though they kept the same actress, didn't they? But really, I cannot express enough when I realized Kunavang was in this trailer and I saw her name. It was probably the highlight of the trailer to me on an initial watch before I went back and started really picking into it. Great stuff. So anyway, I think it's Kunavang speaking right now. She's the voice, and she says it's a monument to mortal resilience. We move into the next shot, which, by the way, looks very much like Shinji Monastery. We get like this bridge which you could travel across. You get these beautiful backgrounds here. It's all just nostalgia bombs, really. In fact, this building here feels like one of the buildings you can go to in the main town. There's like a courtyard in front of it. We arc through that they built new lives, and we'll talk about what's happening here, that sought to, upon the very thing that sought to end theirs. It's a testament to mortal resilience that they built new lives upon the very thing that sought to end theirs. Okay, so this is really, really interesting. What they're saying in the dialogue here, and let's skip back ever so slightly to see the city. What they seem to be saying to me is that the people of Cantha actually had an Elder Dragon threat and dealt with it on their own. So let's remember the world building, the setup here. It's that between Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2, the Canthans became very xenophobic and very isolationist. They closed their borders, they stopped communicating with everyone else, which, by the way, there is precedent for in the story. Even in early Guild Wars 1, when Factions was coming out, they were very remote, and, you know, there would be these long periods where people weren't communicating with them. So they kind of closed their borders, became very isolationist. But perhaps in that, as ugly as it was, and if you play Guild Wars 1, the Winds of Change campaign, you can see how they start to oppress the Tengu and so on, and the birth of the Ministry of Purity. As grotesque as that was, maybe they found strength in it and used that strength to actually fight against an Elder Dragon that rose, and we just didn't know anything about it. The Deep Sea Dragon's location has always been a big mystery. The entirety of the Deep Sea Dragon has just been a big question mark. And I've always liked that about the Deep Sea Dragon, but eventually they will have to answer that question. Where has that thing been? What's it been doing? Going back to some of the earliest setting building for Guild Wars 2, they talked about the Deep Sea Dragon actually interacting with the peoples of Tyria, like tentacles coming out of bodies of water and stuff. And yet, in-game, we've never seen any of that. And obviously the real-world explanation for that probably is they didn't have time to implement all that stuff, and they felt that it would be better just to leave it as a complete mystery, and it was efficient to do so. But now that we're here in the story, maybe the story is that the Deep Sea Dragon was around Cantha. Maybe that's why we also saw Cantha had so much dragony stuff going on. Maybe the salt sprays were somehow related to the Deep Sea Dragon and Kunavang. Maybe it was all somehow intermingled. The Elder Dragon started waking up, and we've only seen the Tyrian side of the story. We saw what Zaitan did and the devastation he wrought when he rose at all. We've seen what Morgemoth did when he woke up, and Kraukatork and so on. And why didn't we see what happened with the Deep Sea Dragon? Well, because the Canthans held it at bay. They built new lives upon the very thing that sought to destroy them. So, they could have handled it. Now, what does handling it mean? The trailer says they built new lives upon the very thing. Well, my guess is that they either defeated or subjugated it. And in both of these situations, what would that mean? A huge release of magic. Like when we destroyed Morgemoth and it sent all the magic everywhere and, you know, activated what was going on at Bloodstone Fen and so on. That could have happened here too. And that magic would have transformed these people and this society. And then, you know, augmented them in some way. And that's what they mean when they say they built new lives upon the very thing that sought to destroy them. So that's my guess. And I think that's all very cool. And in fact, if you go back enough, you'll see many people, myself included, have speculated this would be a badass story for many years now. And it would explain the mysterious disappearance of the Deep Sea Dragon. It might also explain why, even as early as the defeat of Kraukatork, reality seriously started to disintegrate and get messed up until we could prop Arena up and, you know, actually start to control some of this chaos. Maybe it got that crazy because we didn't realize one of the other dragons was already dead. And you can't really blame the Canthans for doing that. I know that there's like this antagonistic side that's set up to them for being isolationists and whatnot, but you can't really blame them for doing that because they're just doing what we did when we beat Zaitan, you know, in the core story. There's an amazing question on my mind as well as to if all of this ends up happening, at what time did the Canthans do it? Did they deal with their dragon before we dealt with Zaitan and then all the others and, you know, Trohan formed the pact and so on? We helped Trohan form the pact. Or were they like way on the ball? If they were all really early with it, then you kind of have to wonder, and if they became augmented and they got all this magic and stuff, why did they not become kind of outward looking? They stayed isolationist even after all of that. It's going to be quite curious. And as the dialogue in the trailer talks about this, we start to see, you know, this energy moving around, right? Which we assume is us for a long time. But actually, as it goes forwards, we start to see the people of Cantha here, you know, as kind of these blue-looking wisps as well. And I don't know whether that's really connected. Maybe the fact that these are wisps that sort of disintegrate is more related to the dialogue talking about how mortals are fleeting. So maybe we don't have to look into that. But I find that quite interesting. The other final little thing that kind of leans into this idea that, yeah, they beat their dragon is as we hear this, the trailer pans through an area of the city where we can see these long snake-like dragons. So it's always been a cool idea that the deep sea dragon would be kind of serpentine. We ended up getting Morgemoth with that design, so there's nothing that actually ties us to it. In Cantha, we have known about salt sprays, which are kind of serpentine dragons, and there was a lot of like architecture and stuff, even in Guild Wars 1, revolving around that. And actually, what we're really looking at is an area of the city called the Dragon's Throat from the first game. But I don't think it's a coincidence that they kind of show us an area reminiscent of the Dragon's Throat. You know, because it doesn't have to be one for one. Not everything is, you know, super concrete. But we get an area that's reminiscent of the Dragon's Throat in the city that looks like basically dead dragons, you know, that they've even built into their architecture. I mean, this just works so perfectly with the idea of what the dialogue is saying at this moment in the trailer. And I think they're just really trying to get you to think, did the Canthans kill a dragon here? Did they solve it on their own? One little wriggle to this might be the stuff with Omad's machine, in which, if you remember, when we first got a glimpse of it in Season 2, the orb kind of exploded to represent that Zaitan had been eliminated and none of the others had. So surely if the deep sea dragon had, then we would have seen something there. So maybe they didn't defeat it until recently. If they did at all, maybe like I said, they just subjugated it and it's not really gone, but they have its control somehow. And there have always been theories that it might be somehow a nice elder dragon. And so that's very cool. I will now, once again, let's skip ahead to the end of the trailer. Draw your attention to the beautiful logo we have again. So hold on. We have two dragons. The idea might have been on your mind that Kunavang is one of the dragons, let's say the one underwater, that doesn't look like it's attacking anyone, doesn't look like it's being oppressive. And then we have another dragon above. Maybe this is the deep sea dragon. It's easy, wooden potatoes. This expansion is about Kunavang fighting against the deep sea dragon, in a similar way to how we saw Glint working against her master, Kraukatoric. But hold on, the trailer seems to set up that there is no deep sea dragon. So sure, I can buy that this is Kunavang. Maybe it is, and maybe she'll be on her side. But then who is this, if it's not the deep sea dragon itself? So I think that's where this expansion is going to get really interesting. I don't think it's about the Deep Sea Dragon. I think the Deep Sea Dragon has been dealt with, and it's this mysterious new character that was mentioned in this tweet. Now, who's the new character? We'll get to that in a second. So let's play it further forward. They built new lives on... And, you know, there's so many cool things ArenaNet can do now. Cantha already was so rich as a setting, but now they have this whole other, like, chapter that they might be able to deliver to us, that what Cantha was like when they beat their dragon, how they beat their dragon. You know, we kind of have like these great Norn legends of things that the Norn did as they escaped from the north, formed their new city in Holbrak. This is going to be even more badass than that, I think. All right, so, and oh my god, there's so much to talk about in terms of the other races. I know many people feel like we already kind of had a human-centric expansion with Path of Fire, and in many ways I kind of agree with that. But that will have to be probably a separate production, because really we only see humans in this teaser. You don't see sort of how the Char might fit into this landscape, or the Sylvari, which is the big one, but all in due time, guys. Alright, so yeah, the dialogue says, mortals are fleeting, they're little flames. They're brilliant, hot, then gone. Pretty tropey. I mean, we obviously see this in big fantasy where you've got, you know, these great everlasting races, even immortal races. How the hell do petty little humans fitting? You know, you tend to find people go for this idea that, you know, the short-lived species are the really brilliant ones, but they are fleeting. So yeah, and these guys running, they're kind of dancing as they go. You can even see from their attire a bit. They feel like Canthan peasants and stuff. It's pretty nice. Okay, and so then we get the dialogue. Those who face eternity forget what a lifetime means. So here, I think we are on the other character. It's not Kunavang talking. The other character is making their case. Looking over at the footage, we get the Jade Seed. Now, I mentioned this a moment ago, But it doesn't look like Cantha has changed much. To be clear, in the lore, the reason that the sea was jade was because of the devastation wrought from the Harvest Temple and what Shiro Tagachi did, the power of Dwayne, whatever, right, at the Harvest Ceremony. And it is kind of expressed that since in Guild Wars 1, we dealt with all of that, realistically, this should be reverting. And after 250 years, I think it's completely fair to expect, according purely to the lore, and if you're just trying to be really strict with it, that this might just be regular water again now. And the other major prominent location, the Echoville Forest, which does not feature in this teaser. Did you guys notice that? There is no Echoville Forest in this teaser. That both of these should have reverted. Not a sea of jade, just a sea. Not as a forest of stone, just a forest. And I've always argued that both could actually be reasonably interesting, even if they're not jade and stone anymore. Well, the teaser has come along and pretty much seems to show that there is still a lot of jade. So now what do I think about this? Well, I love the Sea of Jade. I think it's one of those things that helps Cantha to stand out as a really brilliant, interesting location. I think even with a Sea of Jade, there's all the surrounding oceans and waters that is plenty for them to deal with, you know, whatever underwater content they want to go for or underwater storytelling they want to go for. They definitely didn't need the sea in the Jade Sea in the middle as well. And I'm not too much of a stickler or for this to be a retcon, so to speak. You know, the devs never, ever lock themselves into a specific time scale. I mean, yes, there were glimpses even in Guild Wars 1, which was a very short period of time, that the Jade Sea was reverting, but you know, maybe it's just going to take thousands of years, not hundreds of years, and in that way they haven't retconned anything. They can even do a half and half thing where some of the Jade Sea looks like this, and some of the, you know, further reaches of it, maybe some of the areas closer to the city, further away from the Harvest Temple, are actually becoming water again, so you do get half and half, and in that way you might have some interesting situations of swimming below the Jade like you're under the ice or something. I don't know. I think a lot of people, when they think about this topic, just kind of tend to equate the properties of the Jade to basically being glorified ice. And it's not ice. It can act in any way it likes. It's magical Jade. And besides, like I say, exploring the surface of a frozen sea is still just as compelling to me now as it was many years ago, and I'm sure that there's many new people coming into the franchise who want to get on board with that, you know? You don't want to just go to another large body of water. We've seen that in Guild Wars 2 many times, no? So yeah, I like the decision they've made here, and I think more realistically, we'll see there's big puddles of water and open lakes and stuff within it. And also, not to mention how this would have affected the people who live here. The people who live on this sea, the Luxons, in some ways are only really interesting because of how they've adapted to living on the frozen surface. You take the frozen surface away, the Jade surface away, and maybe then the Luxons become really boring. They're just like pirates, and we've already dealt with a lot of Corsairs and stuff recently, and a ton of pirates at launch. So let's keep the Luxons pirates on a frozen sea, and we still get them riding massive turtles and stuff like that. As for the Echoville Forest, you would have expected them to transition into a shot of that now, right? They don't. I wonder if that's because ArenaNet haven't decided how they want to portray that area. Maybe they could have the forest recovered quicker, but it's still like on this epic, massive scale, and you've got cathedrals built into giant tree trunks still, so it's still really exciting to explore. Another fairly disappointing thing to consider, but is kind of realistic, is that the Echoville Forest might not even be in the expansion at launch. I mean, look at the way that they did Path of Fire. They never got all the areas. Istan came later. Maybe the forest will be like that, and they're going to separate that off to really focus on the potential Sylvari, Warden, Malik connection or whatever in full force post-release. I guess we'll have to find out. I mean, there's just so much world building. If you guys have been following my channel earlier this year, you'll remember I was producing a series of videos I'll be picking up again very soon, following all of the lore and world building from Cantha, and there's just so much. So much. And, you know, they almost don't even have to tamper with the environments much. They'll still have something super rich for us. So back to the dialogue real quick again. Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means. So I think the voice there sounds more like the other character. But isn't it more of a... isn't that an argument in the defense for people? So wouldn't that be more of a Kunavan comment? I'm not too sure on this one. And then here as well, what an ending means. I mean, from my mind, when I think about the idea of MMOs as these everlasting things that can never be left to set and, you know, have to perpetually change and can never end and all these kinds of ideas of MMO, I like the idea of an expansion that has a story that kind of parallels some of those arguments and discussions. And, you know, that's especially an interesting line, like I said at the start of this video. They've called the expansion End of Dragons. I feel like once Guild Wars 2 is done with dragons, Guild Wars 2 is done. So what does an ending mean? What does it mean for the story? What does it mean for this MMO, you know? And to release on the anniversary of the MMO as well. It just all it ties together so neatly. So here, we get the dragon itself comes through. So this, I believe, is ArenaNet of 2020 showing us Kunavang, who we haven't seen for years, okay, years and years. We've just seen the rubbish version of it from Guild Wars 1 at this point. But so here we see Kunavang fly in, sort of the Guild Wars 2 interpretation of Assault Spray. Obviously this isn't in-engine or anything. And we get the line, you know it doesn't have to be this way. To which the mysterious character says, no, Kunavang, it does. So what doesn't have to be this way? The end? I mean, it's so interesting, especially because, now let's remember, the most recent story finale we had. Before the Icebrood Saga, we had the epic defeat of Kraukatoric. Many of these colours feel very Kraukatoric-y as well, don't they, by the way? We had the defeat of Kraukatoric, a tormented creature, who in its dying last breath said one word, and that one word was a bombshell that really hinted at some crazy, like, upper level of lore and mythos that we've never had before. Kraukatoric whispered mother as it died. There was a suggestion of like an origin for the Elder Dragons, something that had created them, something that had looked after them maybe, something that Kraukatoric considered his own mother. A previous cycle, like many cycles before. Like in theory, Kraukatoric had thousands of cycles, tens of thousands of years apart, ravaging Tyria over and over and over again. So the idea of the origin of Kraukatoric himself is just mind-blowing. And yet he did have an origin, and he whispered mother. Mother is what he thought of as he was finally destroyed, as he met his end. And now who is Kunavang talking to? A very feminine, soft kind of creature. But it sounds a bit deeper, a bit wiser. I think it's mother, I really do. And so, when we get to the logo at the end, that is who our replacement for the Deep Sea Dragon is. Mother, Kunavang, Deep Sea Dragon is dead before we even get to the expansion. By the way, I've paused that in a beautiful way, and these look like little ripples of water, don't they? I think that might be what they're doing. And this all somehow ties into the end of the cycle. Which, by the way, when we play forward a little bit more, you will see they've got like this tagline. I guess this is going to be the tagline for the expansion as we go forwards. It's called Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons, but it says the cycle is reborn. So how the hell is that going to work? What is the new cycle? I mean, we don't want a cycle. That was the idea, right? No more feast, no more famine. But there it is. And still, what about the most badass dragon of them all? The first one to wake up, who is not mentioned at all here. We've got like 4 characters maybe we're juggling. And none of them are Primordus, who still lurks in the depths. And I really hope, still to this day, that the true end of Guild Wars 2 will be some epic fight against him after the longest time possible, and he's gathered as much magic as possible, and he was the first to awake. He will become the silent threat in the background, much as the Deep Sea Dragon has been all these years, it seems. What plans do they have? So, there you have it, guys. That is the teaser, and like I said, actually a lot of substantive stuff there. Cantha is beyond confirmed now, and some really interesting stuff to do with the Elder Dragon story, I think, is in waiting for us. So there you have it. I think that's pretty much all I caught from this on my first run through. Let me know what you think in the comments. I will be eagerly looking, and we'll see exactly what maybe can be expanded on, even worth future videos. And also keep an eye out on my channel, because I've got a ton of other stuff for you guys. They announced Guild Wars 2 coming to Steam. There's been a whole revamp to one of the mounts with a whole new adventure thing that I've got to play. I've really not been in game much recently, so I've got a ton to catch up on. There's been a patch that fixed the Mystic Forge in some ways. Should be amazing. So keep an eye out for it, guys. Oh, and a new Fractal, which is confirmed to be in Cantha and is only like a month away. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. Let me know what you guys think. There you have it. Guild Wars 2, The End of Dragons. Thanks for your patience, everyone. It's good to be back.